Today we'll be talking about the human brain, its structures, functions, lobes, and the structures within, and also the cranial nerves and its functions. Here you have the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, frontal lobe. Here you have the cerebellum. Now let's talk about the structures of the brain. Back here you have the primary visual cortex. Above it you have the visual association area. Around this area you have the Wernicke's area. Right here behind the central sulcus you have the primary somatosensory cortex, and behind that you have the somatosensory association cortex. In front of the central sulcus you have the primary motor cortex, and in front of that you have the premotor cortex. And in front of that, in the anterior portion of the frontal lobe, you have the frontal eye field. Around this area you have the Broca's area, and then within here you have the gustatory cortex. Also within this area next to the Wernicke's area, you have the auditory association area and the primary auditory cortex, which is used for hearing. Now inside of the brain. Here you have the corpus callosum. Here you have the septum pellucidum. Right here you have the fornix, and underneath you have the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. This right here is the interthalamic adhesion. Right here is the anterior commissure, and right there is the hypothalamus. Right here you have the pituitary glands. Right here you have the mammillary body. These are your pons. Back here is the pineal gland. Right here you have the fourth ventricle, and right there you have the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. In this area of the cerebellum you have the arbor vitae that look like little branches. Now we're going to go back to the structure of the brain. Here you have the precentral gyrus, and behind the central sulcus you have the postcentral gyrus. Right here you have the lateral sulcus, and in between the occipital lobe and the cerebellum you have the transverse cerebral fissure. Now, onto the nerves of the cranial. Here you have the olfactory nerve 1. And the olfactory nerve 1 is a sensory type of nerve, and its major function is for smell. Right here. Right there, these two right here, you have the optic nerve 2. And that's also for its nerve type is sensory, and its major function is for vision. Underneath here you have right here these two dots right here that look like dots. You have the ocular motor. You have the ocular motor nerve 3, and that's primarily for motor. And its main functions are eyeball and eyelid movement and lens shape. This tiny nerve right there, and there's one on each side, is called the trochlear nerve, and that's for primarily motor, and its main function is eyeball movement and proprioception. Right here you have the trigeminal nerve 5, and it has both nerve types, sensory and motor. Its main functions are sensation of touch, pain for facial skin, nose, mouth, teeth, and tongue. Also proprioception and motor control of chewing. Right here, you have the abducens nerve, and its nerve type is primarily motor. It's used for eyeball movement and proprioception. Right here, you have the facial nerve, and that it has both sensory and motor nerves. And that is used for the movement of facial muscles, tear and saliva secretion, sense of taste. Then you have the vestibulocochlear auditory nerve, 8, and that's used for sensory. And that its main function is hearing and sense of equilibrium. Right next to it, which is not really shown on here, is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and that's nerve 9, and it has both sensory and motor nerves. Its main function is for sensation of taste, touch, and pain from tongue and pharynx, chemoreceptors, blood pressure receptors, movement of tongues and swallowing, and secretion of saliva. Right next to it, where it's not shown, right there, is the vagus nerve 10, and it has both sensory and motor nerves. That one is used for parasympathetic sensations and motor control of motor muscles, association with heart, lungs, viscera, and secretion of digestive enzymes. Next, right here, you have the accessory spinal nerve 11, and that's primarily motor, and it's used for head movement, swallowing, and swallowing. Next, right here, you have the hypoglossal nerve 12, and that's primarily for motor. The main functions are tongue movement, speech, and swallowing. So like I said before, you have the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobes, occipital lobes. That's it. And this is the brain.